Welcome to the Sky at Night from my observatory in Chelsea, and we're all here waiting for the start of the transit of Venus, with the whole party of us all feeling very excited. Conditions are perfect, and I think we're going to have a good view. And we're about to see something that no one now living has ever seen. So let's hope the skies stay clear.
One of the things that's changed most since the last transit was observed in 1882 is the sheer variety of equipment we've got to look at it. And we've got good examples here today. This is a typical modern telescope with the filter film over the front and over the finder, so it'll be perfectly safe. And we'll line that up using the shadows just to tell when you're looking at the sun. This is a hydrogen alpha telescope, picks out a particular level of the sun's surface, and we'll be using that to look for prominences and solar activity later on. This, Patrick's first telescope, still works, of course, and we can use it just to project the image of the sun onto this piece of paper, and we'll easily be able to watch Venus moving across the sun's disk later on. So all we have to do now is hope the skies stay clear and wait for a good transit.
What is a transit of Venus? Well, there are two planets, Mercury and Venus, which are closer to the sun than we are, and therefore sometimes pass between the Earth and the sun and appear as black disks against the sun's face. Mercury transits quite often, Venus doesn't. The last transit of Venus was in 1882. The next will be in 2012, not seen from here, and then no more until the next century. So this is something very special. So far as we're concerned, it is a one-off.
Okay, Bob, so we're 6 o'clock, we're just 10 minutes, 15 minutes away from the start of the transit, and you've probably got the most high-tech way of viewing it here. What are you looking at?
I'm looking at the sun in a very atomic frequency band. I'm looking in hydrogen alpha. What I'm actually doing is I'm seeing the hydrogen on the sun, and I can see the top half of the photosphere.
Right, so you're further out than the visible surface.
A little bit more, not very much, just a little bit. But there's one or two really, really nice prominences
right, 'cause
on
you're
it.
picking out the active areas on the sun.
Yeah.
And we looked yesterday and there was absolutely nothing.
But it's fantastic today. It couldn't have been better. I mean, I can't believe this. There's a massive prominence on the side. It's sticking right out, and I'm just really hoping that what we'll do is, as Venus comes into the top part of the photosphere, I'll begin to see it.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a bet on between everyone how early I get it.
That's right. This is the first time, of course, we've seen the transit of Venus in hydrogen alpha. This technology wasn't around 123 years ago. So.
I don't actually know whether we can see it in hydrogen alpha.
And does it have the black drop effect in hydrogen alpha? What do you think?
I don't know.
So something else we won't have seen at the last transit was here with Jamie Cooper sitting with a laptop. So what are you hoping to use the computer for during the transit?
Basically very simple. We've got a webcam, or a modified webcam. It takes a short movie, so you get those little seconds where there's very steady seeing. We take those frames out of the movie and create an image.
Fabulous. So Damien, we're now probably 5 minutes away from the start of the transit. How's it feel?
I think it's very exciting. Everyone here is excited and really looking forward to, for it to start.
What's the view like through your telescope?
Yes,
Found the sun?
Yes, it's looking quite good at the moment. We've only got like 15 minutes to go now, so...
If that.
Yes,
so
not long.
And you're working in just normal visible light?
That's right,
yeah.
Now we know the transit is about to start.
Yeah, I've got it in H alpha. It's there. It's right on the very limb. I can see it just cutting through the top of the photosphere.
Can't see it on the projection yet. I can see it just coming in on the edge of the disk now. There's a very small bite taken
There
out
it
of
is. There's Venus now. Just first contact, a tiny notch. Venus now passing onto the disk of the sun for the first time since 1882.
And it's like the world's smallest eclipse. Just a cut, first contact.
And when we come to second contact, which will be in, I think, in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's moving rather quickly.
Then we'll see
faster than I expected.
possibly see the backdrop.
That's right. So Damien, it's really clear now on the projection. We can see Venus is half onto the disk. What's the computer showing you?
Yes, it's showing Venus about halfway onto the solar disk now. Yes, it's looking very clear. About 4 or 5 minutes' time, we should see the black drop.
Now, how's the contrast? Because one of the things about Venus is it's incredibly dark, much darker than any sunspot.
Yes, it really just looks like a small bite has been taken out of the edge of the sun at the moment.
That's right. You certainly couldn't confuse it, and it's much larger than any sunspot.
Oh, absolutely,
group,
yes.
It's incredibly obvious. Venus now seems to be almost completely on the disk. What's it look like with the naked eye?
I can see it quite clearly, and there's no mistaking it now.
And even after 47 years of the sky night, something we've never seen before, and like nothing we've seen before.
And we won't see again from here, after all. This really is a one-off, and I'm so glad we have these perfect conditions.
Exactly. It's nice to have a blue sky for something
astronomical. It really is.
I think that's second contact.
No, it's not yet.
No, not yet. There's still a faint sliver there.
It's nice to have the high-resolution people behind us, so
Exactly.
they can keep me right. It just illustrates how difficult this would be.
Well, you have my first telescope.
And it's about the same size as Horrocks telescope,
Exactly.
of course.
Very
so
close.
we like to think we're the authentic ones in the garden, and this is the modern approach behind us.
This is what I had when I was 11 years old.
Did you think then you'd be seeing the transit of Venus with it?
No. And there is the black drop. No question about it. It's quite unmistakable. If we tried to time the moment for second contact, we couldn't have done it. So the black drop really exists in the visual light anyway.
It doesn't happen in H alpha.
You don't have a
No,
black drop
not
in
at
H
all.
alpha.
I've just got a straight disc.
That's something that no one said before. There's
No.
no black drop in H alpha.
Well, I can't see a black drop.
Anyone else see one? So second contact's now okay. I think the black drop's gone, Patrick, if you have a
It
look.
has?
Yeah,
I did.
So I think but we saw it clearly with the projection through the telescope, the old-fashioned way of looking at things. But the people using webcams, using modern cameras, didn't see a black drop, which is the first time, as far as I know, anyone's seen the transit of Venus without seeing that. Have optics improved? Have cameras improved?
I wonder. We used to think the black drop was due to Venus's atmosphere. We now know it's not. But Venus does have an atmosphere, a very curious atmosphere. And Venus indeed is a very curious kind of world. A little while ago, I talked to Professor Fred Taylor.
One of the things that worries us about Venus, apart from trying to understand the very high temperatures and pressures on the surface, is the dynamics of the atmosphere. We think we understand the dynamics of terrestrial planet atmospheres, particularly the Earth. We use this knowledge for weather forecasting and so on. When we try to transfer that to Venus, it all goes wrong. Because Venus has tremendously high winds around the equator. They're actually stronger than hurricane force, more than 200 miles an hour, blowing constantly around the equator in this very dense atmosphere. It's absolutely remarkable, and we don't know what's driving that. We'd really like to get more data on the meteorology of the atmosphere and try to understand this strange behavior. At the poles, Venus has an enormous vortex, thousands of miles across, which turns out to be double. Instead of a single eye in the middle with air descending, which is what we expected, it's actually double, and there are two vortices going around the pole, and the same thing at the other pole. This again is behavior that doesn't correspond to our understanding of terrestrial planet atmospheres.
And of course Venus has a very slow rotation, 243 Earth days, longer than a Venus year, but the upper clouds go around in 4 days.
Yes, that's what's so remarkable. It's 60 times the speed of the surface underneath.
And also, in a sense, opposite to that of the Earth. That goes back to front.
Yes, everything goes back to front, that's right. That's something that's telling us something about the very early history of Venus that, again, we don't understand. One of the things we also like to get much more about is an understanding of volcanoes on Venus, because with the Magellan data, we can see these enormous volcanoes on the surface. We can see runs of lava that are hundreds of miles long. So Venus is obviously a very volcanic place. But what we don't know is how to date that volcanism. Is it an ancient effect that we're seeing remnants of, or is it happening now? And I think that the bizarre state of the atmosphere is telling us that it's probably happening now, but we don't know for sure.
What about the changing amount of sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere?
Yes, that too. The Pioneer Venus spacecraft observed for 10 years, and during that time the amount of SO2 in the upper atmosphere changed by a factor of 10.
That's indicative.
And that sounds like volcanoes erupting and then slowing down a bit and presumably erupting again. What we need to do is look at the behavior of those gases in the lower atmosphere, which we've never seen before, which we'll get from the Venus Express mission that's coming up next year.
I remember the time when Venus was called the planet of mystery. Well, we found out a lot, but there's still a large number of problems remaining.
There certainly are, and I think it gets more mysterious the more we learn. You know, there have been nearly 30 spacecraft missions to Venus, and there have been telescopic observations since the discovery of the Ashen Light in 1643. We still we've acquired a massive amount of data, but we still don't really understand how the planet's behaving. And as I said, that's actually quite worrying, because it is the most Earth-like planet.
I think one thing is quite definite. There can be no life on Venus as we know it, and probably never has been.
No, I think that must be right. It is possible, perhaps, to imagine ecological niches in the clouds and so on, but I think that's rather far-fetched.
I remember giving a talk in London, around about 1960, and I said then that as a prospective colony, Venus might be more promising than Mars. How wrong I was.
Yes, indeed, but it really did look that way.
It
It should have been better than it is. I wish we understood why.
So Ninian, it's 7 o'clock, we're almost an hour into the transit, and you're observing in H alpha.
That's right.
So could you explain what that is for us?
A hydrogen alpha filter shows you a very, very, very narrow part of the visible spectrum. such that you actually see most of the hydrogen in the solar
Right,
disk.
okay.
In actual fact, you're seeing the chromosphere of the sun,
Right.
which, if you imagine the sun like an onion, it's the next layer out.
So how
from
much
the
further out
photosphere.
is that above the
It's about
photosphere?
3,000 or 4,000 kilometres out.
Right, which is why we saw the transit first in
Exactly,
hydrogen
yeah,
alpha.
yeah. Here I've been trying to video it.
Great.
I'm using
See
a
the
very
camera here.
a special double stack filter, which is even narrower wave band.
Right, okay.
So I'm.
So you're really selecting one level of the sun's
Absolutely,
atmosphere,
yeah,
and that's the
subaxial
level where
level.
all the activity is.
Exactly, and hopefully when I actually start to analyse the video, we'll see whether we really did get a black drop effect.
Right, we've been talking
in
about
H
that,
alpha.
it's still not
Exactly,
clear.
Yeah. I saw it in white light, but I
Okay.
couldn't see it in H alpha.
So apart from the filters, the telescopes are perfectly normal refractors.
An ordinary, everyday, well, good quality refractor. Yeah,
Excellent.
that's right. Yeah,
Good.
Yeah.
Tell us about this telescope. Am I allowed to call it the low-tech way of
You
looking
can
at
if you
things?
like, yes, it won't mind. This is my childhood instrument, really. It's a Newtonian reflector which me and my dad made out of a kit, you know, and it's cost almost nothing, but it does work, as you can see.
It's a
and
beautifully sharp image, actually. I like
this is-
the coat hanger attachment. I think that's
I was
excellent.
very pleased with that. That was a last-minute modification. I think it was invented by Messrs. Heath and Robinson. But it works, which is great. Yes, and you get a very clear image of Venus, which looks very black.
Yeah,
doesn't
it's
it?
very,
And
very, very
sharply
dark.
defined. So different from a sunspot.
So were you using this for the ingress, the beginning, or were you...
No, I was looking through the H alpha. I was intrigued to know what would happen in
And
H
what
alpha.
did happen?
Well, I think it did make contact a little early. I'm not quite sure how much because I didn't take the precise
Noises were
measurements.
coming from behind us before we could see it.
Yes, I
certainly.
think I screamed first, probably.
This is only the sixth transit of Venus to have been observed, the first being way back in 1639 by Jeremiah Horrocks. Earlier on, I talked to Dr. Alan Chapman of Oxford.
In fact, the first person to predict that a transit was going to happen was Johannes Kepler in 1627. He knew there was going to be one in 1631, but he didn't think there'd be another until 1761. And the man who realised there would be was an English amateur named Jeremiah Horrocks, working in rural Lancashire at a place called Much Hoole. And he, in early October 1639, calculated from a mixture of the analysis of astronomical tables and from his own observations that on the 24th of November 1639, Venus would pass across the sun's surface.
One thing I think important here, after all, a transit of Venus is interesting, but it was once regarded as very important. I think the first man who realised that was Edmund Halley.
The first recognition that the transit of Venus could be used to measure the distance of the sun, the solar parallax, was indeed, as you say, Edmund Halley in 1678. Now, in that year, he was in the southern hemisphere on the island of St. Helena, and he happened to notice Mercury crossing the sun's disk. And it suddenly occurred to Halley, if I can observe Mercury here in the southern hemisphere, and there are, let's say, people in England or in Paris observing it as well, well, we'll see Mercury in a slightly different part of the sun's surface. And if you can then triangulate that great baseline, as it were, from, let's say, London to St. Helena, then, using this sort of sophisticated surveying technique, you could measure the distance of Mercury and measure the distance of the sun. But what he realised is that the Mercury transit itself was too quick and basically Mercury was too small. He then had the brilliance to recognise in 1761 Venus would pass across the sun's disk. And he did all the basic mathematics between 1680 and 1715 and published these in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. This was to alert astronomers worldwide. Now, by the time that you get to 1761, everybody is getting ready to see the transit, and particularly England and France, who at that time had the finest astronomers in the world. But all the observers who saw the 1761 transit all recognised that there was one big problem they hadn't expected. To measure the distance of the sun accurately, you needed to be able to time precisely when Venus entered and left the sun's disk. And they all reported a thing which they called the black drop, a sort of blur. Now, by the time that you got to the 1769 transit, observers were getting a bit ready to how to deal with this problem of the blur. And it was here that the British decided to send Lieutenant James Cook, he wasn't at this stage yet commissioned captain, to the island of Tahiti, or it was then called Otaheite. And there, right round the opposite side of the world, he would have this tremendous baseline from European, African and Indian locations to get the best observation of the transit of 1769. And of course he succeeded in getting that observation, and that was the beginning of Captain Cook's tremendous career. Now, from those two transits, it was possible for astronomers to work out the distance of the Sun to pretty closely what we have today, about 92 million miles. And you may say, why was this so important? Well, don't forget, of course, Isaac Newton had produced a tremendous revolution in physics, and Newton had made it possible, if you knew certain fixed distances in astronomy, to calculate proportionately other distances. And people like Neville Maskelyne, the Astronomer Royal, and even Halley earlier, had recognised that if you knew exactly the Earth-Sun distance, then you could use that as a measuring rod to measure the distances of everything else in the solar system. And if you could then measure their distances, you could calculate their masses. So by 1790, we not only knew the dimensions of the solar system pretty well as we know it today, but we'd also been able to calculate the planetary masses as well.
All the same, though, they were still going to observe the 1874 and 1882 transits to hopefully get still better results.
Absolutely. By 1874 and 1882, there was a tremendous project to get even better results. And of course, the English Astronomer Royal, Sir George Airy, was the real organiser of the 1874 transit. And although, yes, there were expeditions sent to Hawaii and Kerloigan's Island, which was an uninhabited island virtually on the outskirts of Antarctica, we have to bear in mind, though, that the world had changed by 1874. You didn't need as many expeditions, because by that time there were observatories in California, observatories in South America, observatories in Japan and China and Australasia. Also, too, by 1874, two other things have come in. The world has come to be already connected by electric telegraph and steamship. And so by 1874, you can get your West Coast American observations telegraphed across to Europe in the same day.
Venus is now very near the edge of the Sun. The transit is nearly over, so we're seeing the last stages of a very, very rare phenomenon. I still feel excited, you know, because I'm seeing something here that I will never see again, and most people won't see in their lives probably. So it's really a very exciting moment. Not spectacular, but absolutely fascinating. And we've been privileged down here to such a splendid view.
The weather's held out throughout the entire transit, which is fabulous. There's hardly a cloud in the sky, and what haze there has been has actually steadied the atmosphere, so we've got much better pictures from the telescopes behind us.
No, there's no sign of the black drop yet.
Nothing.
And still a certain amount of brightness between the limb and the planet itself.
There, is that the black drop there?
Yes, that's it.
You can see it there.
Yes, that's the black drop.
There it is. There is the black drop. It started.
There's a, yep, so
Yes,
in hydrogen alpha from behind me, I'm hearing it's still there, but we can definitely see that it's almost reaching out towards the limb.
Yes,
isn't it exciting?
It's fabulous.
It's there.
It's fabulous. We can
That
just
is
see that.
Absolutely wonderful.
That definitely is the black drop. A thing we'll never see again.
It's almost clearer than it was when it went onto the disk, Patrick.
I think it's definitely clearer. In a very few minutes now, the last chance will be gone, and that will be the end of the transit of Venus.
It's going.
I think that's going now, Patrick.
It's going.
I think I've got to say...
I think that's gone. I can't see
gone
that.
now.
I think I've got to say yes. I've got to admit I've lost it.
They've still got
Venus, Venus, goodbye. Goodbye, Venus, and thank you. Well, that was absolutely great. One of the most exciting things I've ever seen. Not spectacular, but among the most fascinating objects one could possibly imagine. And certainly, down here we had a carnival atmosphere, perfect conditions, and really a wonderful day, one we won't forget. When I come back next month, we'll go much further afield. The Cassini-Huygens probe is on its way to Saturn and will first encounter Saturn's curious icy moon, Phoebe. But the player's out now, a march composed by John Philip Sousa for the last transit, called it the Transit of Venus. So until next month, good night.